Can you tell us about the extraordinary, some say visionary, efforts to preserve the Valles caldera?
People have wanted to preserve the caldera, to put it in public ownership since pretty early in the 20th century. Edgar Hewitt, who founded the Museum of New Mexico and the anthropology department down here at UNM, was one of the big forces there. And it seems to me, Don, correct me if I'm wrong, but every decade or two after that, there was another push to get the caldera into public hands, then known as the Baca location. And it's going to take people's commitment in years to come to maintain that. The Valles caldera should have a broad constituency, if you'll accept the term, among the people of New Mexico. And if people will take an interest in the place, I hope our book can stimulate people to take an interest in the place and to require, to demand the right kind of management for it for the very long term. Mm.
What was it about the caldera that just struck people, that inspired this urge to preserve it?
Well, that's another deep question.
And why was it necessary?
Well, it's one of those things where when you see it, you know, because the experience of coming into it is so dramatic. The open space, the high elevation, its verdantness. I think overall it represents sort of the finest of alpine grasslands in the Southwest. It's got all the qualities of that, and in the middle of this arid lowlands, to come across that basin full of open grasslands, open space, distances. There's a whole bunch of aesthetic reasons that it just clicks all the check boxes for making you feel at home and wanting to get in there and explore. I think it's almost universal. People who come into the space feel that sense.
And one of the things about it is that since it's a bowl, you know, it's a caldera, it's a depressed bowl surrounded by a mountain rim, it's enclosed, it's a world all its own. And everything in that world is beautiful.
Do you mean actually biologically and in terms of the flora and fauna, or spiritually it's a world all its own?
Well, it has that feeling of enclosure. Of course, the plants and animals are, you know, distributed beyond the rim. But when you're in the caldera, you feel as though you're in this particular space. And wherever you look, it's beautiful. And what you hear is only sounds from within that bowl. So your senses are really stimulated to be in that particular place.
There's also the element of water. It's a bowl that collects water, and it's wet, and in this part of the world, water has always been, you know, people's sensitivity to it is heightened whenever you're around it, because it's a scarce thing, and you're in this bowl full of grasslands that are well watered and full of wildlife. So just the sense of that hydrology, which is contained in the bowl, is really powerful.
As you say, it's a varied environment. It's a dormant volcano. What, in addition, stands out about this landscape that makes it so unusual?
I think maybe the largest one initially upon discovering the place is just the open expanse of it, the size, the distance. It's a, you know, spectacular sight just in and of itself. And as you explore it beyond that, you discover these other qualities that are within that first hit of grandeur. You find many, many pockets of wonder. And one of the things that I marveled at was that I was one of the first photographers to get in there to explore it photographically. And there wasn't a history of what are known as establishing shots, where a photographer goes into a landscape and goes to certain vantage points where you can begin to get your bearings and establish what the main landscape features are. There was none of that when I got in there, and it was tremendously exciting and overwhelming. And since then, I just keep discovering more and more of these spots that are just so special in their perspective on this huge expanse within a microcosm of it.
Is it an endangered landscape?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, in beauty and potential for inspiration for recreation, in terms of biological productivity. There are very few landforms anywhere on the planet that express the character of a caldera as clearly and as dramatically as this one. And you add to that the productivity, the wildlife. I mean, this is probably the most beautiful elk haven in New Mexico, in the entire Southwest. It's a landscape of national park quality, and so through a very, very long and tortured path, it is now part of the national park system.
So what are the dangers that still confront the caldera?
Well, just from the standpoint of climate change, I mean, if you were going to adopt a landscape where you wanted to observe the effects of climate change over the next 20, 30 years, you couldn't do better in New Mexico than to adopt this one. We've seen just in the last couple of decades, the Cerro Grande fire, the Las Conchas fire, the Thompson Ridge fire, some pretty dramatic changes in the landscape of the caldera that fundamentally are linked to climate change. That's not going to stop. These processes are ongoing, and they affect the forest cover, the grasslands, the hydrology that Don mentioned, the arroyo formation in some of the areas downstream of the burned areas, all of that. This is a landscape in continuous transition, and it's got a lot to teach us because of that.
There's all kinds of data being collected in this changing landscape. What does that mean for the future of this place and our understanding of climate change and of changing environments like this?
One of the things we did that we got right was to establish a very robust science program for the Valles Caldera with a lot of monitoring, inviting a lot of outside researchers to come in and do studies and so forth. And so this has become one of the best studied landscapes in our region. And it keeps telling us new things that only expand our understanding of the magic of the place. It's not science that leads to more power and technological leverage, but it's science that opens the gates of wonder.
So Don, the Valles Caldera is close to home for you. What is it like to tell a story that's so near to you? You grew up going to it. You were the first photographer that could go in and really document it.
Well, I think the story for me is just that personal journey of discovery of a place that I thought I knew. And that's been the story for me that continues today, is that for decades I admired it from the outside and had notions about what it meant and what it was like. And then to get inside and begin to explore it, it's just that ongoing story of discovery, what the place means on so many levels, including the aesthetic level, which I explore through photography.
I loved that you mentioned in the book that initially there was geothermal exploration there was intensive logging, there were all these other things that took place. And as you were photographing, you first were sort of trying to keep those out of the frame.
Yeah.
Why did you want to do that?
That was sort of an early revelation of mine, was that I was photographing what I wanted to see and not what was actually there. And it hit me one day when I was trying to photograph a morning sunrise through mist rising through the forest, and I wanted a primal forest with big trees and the sunlight beams shooting through, and I was wandering through this forest and there were big stumps everywhere. And I kept trying to frame the stumps out and becoming more and more frustrated because they were everywhere. And then at some point I realized, well, that's the story, that's the photo, that's what's happening here, not what you're trying to make out of it, but what's in front of you. So that was a great moment of realization for me.
You explored a lot of the damage from the Las Conchas fire and other wildfires. What was that like?
Well, at first it was really upsetting to me. It was really tragic and emotionally difficult because I'd grown up in love with this landscape, really. embracing it in a certain state. To see it burned was really painful. In fact, there's places I didn't want to see, little special corners that I had loved because of their verdantness and big trees and all that. And the amazing thing that's happened in the 20 years since the Cerro Grande fire, which was the first big fire, is I've come to appreciate the beauty in that burned over landscape. It's magnificent and gorgeous in its own way. It doesn't respond to us in some sort of cliche image we have of what a beautiful landscape is. It's a landscape that's responding to this trauma in its own natural, vibrant, resilient way, and it's wonderful to experience that.
What can we learn, Bill, about that kind of transitioning landscape?
This planet we live on is beautiful all the time. And there is beauty to be found in every aspect of it and every stage of a given location's transformation. And I think that we as stewards of landscapes like the Valles Caldera, our job is to honor that beauty and try to be worthy of it, try to protect it, try to encourage it.
How can we honor, what can we learn from it?
So much. I mean, that is one of the great teaching landscapes in New Mexico. It's a place where we can go for any number of reasons to see how the natural world wants to work, and where we can absorb that learning in an atmosphere of beauty and inspiration.
Why is connection to place like this so important?
I don't know. I think it's a human thing. For some reason, I've grown up with a real affinity for place and for landscape, and this is one of the most important ones and one's most impressive in my life. But I think it's a very human impulse. It's just a matter of how much you open yourself up to it. It's very innate in our biology and our psychology to relate to place in many ways. To be aware for your own survival and protection. You're programmed with lots of tools of awareness, but also for your own spiritual journey, for exploring your relationship and the meaning of your whole existence is so well expressed and explored in a wild place like this.
What about you, Bill?
Well, I agree with what Don has said, and I feel that I'm looking at the photograph that's on the screen there right now, and it's in places like that we can step out of the kind of time we experience in our day-to-day lives and go into deep time, go into sort of the planet's clock instead of our wristwatch or our smartphone's time. And the Valles Caldera invites one to go into a deeper, broader, slower time that is just very satisfying to our souls.
Why is it so important for you?
Oh, I need that release on a regular basis. I like to say that all human beings should get regular injections of awe and wonder, and the Valles Caldera is a place to really fill up on those sensations, because it's like sometimes you go to a really wonderful movie in the cinema and you come out and suddenly the traffic lights are brighter, or the street lighting is more dramatic. Anyhow, the world livens up. Well, the Valles Caldera is like that in another deeper, even more sensuous and satisfying way.